question is that this House do now adjourn. Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Pope Benedict said that food security is an authentically human requirement. Guaranteeing it for present and future generations also means safeguarding ourselves against the uncontrolled exploitation of natural resources. Now, it won't have escaped your notice, Madam Deputy Speaker, or indeed the notice of other members of the House. I represent a rural constituency with a preponderance of agricultural employment. Many of my constituents are employed in agriculture, horticulture and the food industry and related jobs. And Lincolnshire boasts some of the best growing land in the country. Unsurprisingly, therefore, Lincolnshire is responsible for 30% of the nation's vegetables, producing 19% of the poultry, 20% of the sugar beet, not to mention 90% of ornamentals and flowers. And I just mention that last section because horticulture, the ornamental sector, is also an important employer in my constituency. Lincolnshire also, by the way, and friends further north in the county will know this, processes 70% of the UK's fish. Horticulture and potato crops use 6% of the farm area in Greater Lincolnshire, and Lincolnshire has a total agricultural output of over £2 billion, representing 12% of England's total agricultural production. Now, the critical thing about all of this is the quality of the land. It won't again have escaped the notice of the House that much of that land is alluvial, and the silt and the peat further inland makes it prime growing land. Grade 1, 2 or 3A land predominates in the Fens. And other Lincolnshire colleagues representing the House tonight will recognise why that matters so much, not only to local economy, to local society, but of course it matters as well in the national interest. Food security is not merely an indulgence, it is critically important to the common good. And I suppose I happily give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you. I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way and for securing this important debate and for being such an eloquent champion on the issue of food security. My constituency of Chester South and Eddisbury has a large rural community like his, and it is clear when I speak to farmers that food security is national security. And the previous government did a great deal on this issue, from the Farm to Fork Summit to the Food Security Index. Does my right honourable friend agree that we need to see more from this new government on food security, for instance, legally binding food security targets?
Well, with the perception for which the honourable lady is already in the House becoming known, she anticipates the next part of my peroration. Because she represents an area I know well and is glorious, and I know now too that it has a glorious new member of Parliament. The point that she highlights is that over the recent events, particularly the pandemic and the war in Europe, food security has gone from being a marginal matter, a matter that people like me raised regularly, but was seen as rather self-indulgent, because people know that I represent an area of the kind I described, and they felt I was merely championing those domestic interests to a matter that goes well beyond the domestic, to one of profound national importance. What those events have shown us is that economic resilience is a salient. We need to be sure that in times of crisis, but also in other times too, that we can withstand the shocks that are the inevitable consequence of human circumstances and human frailty. So making our country more resilient in those circumstances has become a national imperative, and I'm delighted to say that in what I hope we can all agree is a post-liberal age, that the issue of food security, far from being marginal, has become mainstream. And I happen to know that the Minister is in a place who's an old parliamentary friend, he having shadowed me when I was a Minister of the Department of Transport, and done so with great style, if I might say so, shares my view about that salience, and I anticipate his response to this debate, therefore, with both enthusiasm bordering on glee.
Will
now,
my right honourable friend give way?
I will happily give way to my honourable friend.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. I wonder whether he would undertake to the House today that he will continue to share his insights into food security with a party opposite with no history particularly in that respect, and indeed a front bench which consists of a Secretary of State from Croydon, a Minister of State from Cambridge and a couple of others from Hull and Coventry respectively. They know little of country ways, they know little of the importance of food security, and I hope my right honourable friend, in his charming and constructive way, will ensure that the party opposite and the ministers in particular learn from his great knowledge.
Well, I'll hear nothing negative said about Cambridge, given my connection with Keyes College, although I've never really knowingly been to Croydon, and so can't comment on that. But what's certainly absolutely true is that this goes beyond party politics. And my honourable friend's right to emphasise the fact that any responsible government would recognise the facts I set out a moment or two ago, that this has changed in terms of its salience. We've been through some difficult times in recent years, and they have concentrated minds in a way that might otherwise not have happened. I happily give way from a gentleman who's making one of his rarer interventions in this House.
First of all, congratulate the Honourable Gentleman for Right Honourable Member for South Holland and the Deepings. And he outlined the issues for his constituency. My constituency, Madam Deputy Speaker, is the same. Agriculture is really important. They create some 3,500 jobs in the factories. I live in a farm. I declare an interest as a member of the Ulster Farmers Union. I understand the issues of farming very well. But the Honourable Gentleman has outlined what I think he hopes to see. Does he agree with me when it comes to getting a strategy here at Westminster, that strategy must encompass all of the regions of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, that be Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, because if we do it together, then we quite clearly can make a food strategy that works for us all. Does he agree that that would be the positive and best way forward?
Well, as I've already made clear, it's a kingdom-wide priority. So he's right to highlight the issues in his part of our United Kingdom. Returning, if I might, to Lincolnshire, however, over 90% of the Fens farmland is grade 1 or 2 quality. And that's interesting in itself, given that nationally, if we look at farmland as a whole, grade 1 and 2 together form about 21% of all farmland, not all land, all farmland, with grade 3A covering a further 21%. The disturbing thing, however, is that my region has lost 3,232 hectares of the best and most versatile farmland since 2010, the greatest absolute loss within a single region. And worse than that, Madam Deputy Speaker, the county that I represent is being targeted for large-scale developments which are invidious if you take my point about the common good and the national interest being served by protecting our food security. In Lincolnshire alone, there are currently applications for large-scale solar developments equivalent to the size of 62 Hyde Parks, totalling 9,109 hectares, or 1.3% of total land across the county. I know that some of those are in the constituency of my honourable friend, to whom I'm happy to give way.
Well, I congratulate my right honourable friend, who is not just speaking for South Holland and the Deepings tonight, but he's speaking for the whole of Lincolnshire with our concern. Just before the general election, there was a written ministerial statement which set out a number of different provisions and thoughts on the problem that he's describing, but it specifically mentioned Lincolnshire, and it specifically mentioned the issue of geographic clustering. Does he share my disappointment that this new Labour government has not committed to those provisions and those statements?
Well, I do anticipate his disappointment, but I wouldn't go so far as to say I share it. He's been a resolute champion of his constituents in respect of both food security and resisting developments they simply don't want. And if we believe in the devolution of power, we believe in empowering local communities to have a greater say in their futures, we can't simultaneously, when they disagree with government priorities, snuff them out, ignore them, disregard their perfectly proper concerns, and that's something I know he would never do. But where I might disagree, my honourable friend, is I have hope. There are those who will say that the new minister isn't up to the job. I don't agree. I have worked with him previously, and I know that he is a diligent and decent man who will take these matters very seriously. So I wouldn't want to entirely write off the prospects of us making a persuasive argument sufficient to effect government policy, even if we can't change it entirely.
My right honourable friend as well.
I'll happily give way.
I'm most grateful to my right honourable friend, but does he not agree with me that in a situation where there are competing priorities between environmental stewardship, food production and house building, there does need to be clarity from the government over how they evaluate and prioritise the relative distribution of that high quality land that he speaks about. And without some real teeth around what food security means in terms of legislation as national security, there is wide range of interpretations that leave the cause that he's speaking to this evening in a vulnerable position.
Well, this is why my honourable friend from Grantham and Bourne makes such a powerful point, because as my honourable friend has said, there are competing imperatives here. And energy security and food security must not be allowed to contradict one another. Both can be pursued with the right approach and with a sensitive treatment of where different applications are located. And my argument tonight is that sensitivity, that precision, isn't currently prevailing. Indeed, the scale of applications we're talking about in Lincolnshire alone are over 2,000 acres in some cases, eating up vast swathes of highly productive agricultural land. And once it's eaten up, one suspects it will never return to agricultural production. There's a myth, of course, about wind turbines. Those who have been in this House for a long time and those who followed my career even before they became members of this House, as I know many did, will remember that I campaigned from the time I got here against onshore wind, not only because of the aesthetics of onshore wind, which are, as I think all men and women of taste would acknowledge, grim, but also because the concrete used to anchor them will never leave the ground. Even when the turbines have ceased to serve their purpose, nobody seriously believes there will be a commercial interest in removing that concrete, which will fill valuable growing land, spoil the soil, if I can turn a phrase that might last and make an impression on you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and others too. So the issue here is about government taking forward its priorities in a way which is consistent but sensitive, as I said before, to the imperative of food security alongside that of energy security. There are 14 nationally significant infrastructure projects or solar applications in Lincolnshire constituencies. They're large projects by definition. In other words, more than 50% of the nationally proposed solar plants are in Lincolnshire, Leicester or Rutland. That can't be sensible. Of course we should be pursuing renewable technologies, but surely solar belongs on buildings. Every large commercial building, every warehouse, and they're springing up everywhere, every office block, and many more houses could accommodate solar panels and deliver solar power. And yet we're allowing developers, often for no more than their own self-interest, to make applications on the best growing land in our country. And I can't believe this minister believes in that. I can't believe he's going to allow it. And I hope he'll say that he won't when he speaks. There's another threat facing my constituency, and it has an effect on food security too. And that's the immense number of pylons that are proposed. 87 miles worth of huge pylons along the whole of the East Coast. Neither wanted nor needed by local people. I say not wanted for self-evident reasons, but not needed because there are better ways of transmitting power. As Lincolnshire County Council have argued, an offshore grid is a much more suitable way of transmitting power. Pylons are yesterday's technology, and yet we're being faced with the prospect of them filling the big skies of Lincolnshire. We either care about the glory of our landscape or we're careless of it. I know my honourable friend cares about it deeply.
Honourable gentleman for giving way. And on the issue of pylons, he will recall perhaps that on the final day before the election, I held an adjournment debate about the Grimsby to Walpole proposals from National Grid, and the then minister agreed or said he would like to see a review. Does my honourable friend agree that he share my hope that the new government will follow that decision and instigate a review?
I didn't chamber when my honourable friend held that debate. I rushed there when I saw his name on the screen, as I so often do. And he was right to highlight the National Grid decision-making process and to play his part, as I have and other members, including my honourable friend for Grantham and Bourne, in that consultation, that discussion. I'm, again, more hopeful than many that actually we can persuade National Grid and we can persuade ministers to look at some of those other options. Undergrounding in the fens, for example, where tall structures have a disproportionate impact on the landscape, is a possibility. But I do think, as I've said earlier, that the offshore grid proposed by the County Council is perhaps the best way forward. Now, the last government published, for the first time, a UK food security report in 2021. And I hope this government will take forward that kind of work on a non-partisan basis. It committed to assess our food security at least every 3 years, hosting the Farm to Fork Summit, which took place in 2023. I hope the government will continue in that vein. The public procurement of UK food is also a pressing priority. I never really thought that any government of any colour, and I've been in quite a number of them, really got the issue of public procurement right. I was always told, but I ought not to say this to with civil servants in earshot, because it's like speaking in front of the children in a way, and it's rather rude. And I had some very good civil servants, but I always felt civil servants were putting impediments in the way of using procurement as a tool to deliver national priorities. And I do think procurement can be used more intelligently to bring about better ends, and food procurement is a really good example of that. Why on earth are public bodies not prioritising British food? Why is it that any number of public sector organisations, from the health service to the prisons, from schools to this place, and local authorities, aren't buying British? Surely we should be buying British to support our country and the jobs that go with food production. So I do hope my Backing Britain, Buying British campaign will gain support across the chamber, and I'm going to ask the Minister, when I produce the badges, which will be coming out shortly, to wear one with pride, because we certainly do. I see the honourable gentleman's gagging for a badge already. I give way to him.
David Chadwick. Thank you for giving way. Last week I was privileged to attend the Royal Welsh Show in my constituency, Brecon, Radnor and Cwmtawi, one of the biggest constituencies in England and Wales. I spoke to many farmers, and top of their list of concerns was the power imbalance between producers and retailers. Will he agree with the Lib Dem manifesto, which called for a strengthening of the groceries code adjudicator to ensure fairness in the supply chain, thereby protecting producers and guaranteeing food security?
Well, I don't make a habit of saying kind things about Liberals of any description, but I'm going to say something quite kind to John Adjournment because he's right to draw attention to that code. I was instrumental when I was a minister in the Department for Business at the time of arguing the case for the Groceries Code adjudicator. I met the first adjudicator and brought the second, the current incumbent, to my constituency to meet a group of farmers and growers in the last Parliament. So he's right about the strength of that, and that just proves something that not everyone here will know. Even Liberal Democrats sometimes get it right. In summary, Madam Deputy Speaker, I believe that now is the time for food security. Now is the time, building on the last government's beginning, and it was a belated beginning, to make food security a central tenet of the new government's priorities. I know the honourable gentleman has enjoyed good relations with farmers and growers during his period as a shadow minister. That's been reported to me by my constituents and others. And he will have heard this argument made by them, not only by those of us who represent them in this place. It is really of vital importance in the national interest for the common good that we don't any longer allow our valuable agricultural land to be used for all kinds of other purposes, and by so doing to compromise this country's food security, making us more dependent on imports, more vulnerable, increasing emissions, increasing food miles, damaging local economies. That's not the way forward. Let's make food security matter. Thank you.
Daniel Zeichner.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's very good to see you in your place. And can I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman not only for his very kind words and warm welcome, but also his customarily thoughtful speech, not least his very comprehensive account of his wonderful county of Lincolnshire and the huge contribution that Lincolnshire makes to our food production. And I'd like to also thank the other honourable members who made interventions and made also very thoughtful contributions to today's debate. And I can't tell you how delighted I am to be here standing on this side of the chamber at the dispatch box for the first time as Minister for Food Security and Rural Affairs. And I think just the very title is a clear statement of this government's commitment, not just to rural areas in general, but also because this government absolutely does, as was said, recognise that food security is national security. And that's why we need a resilient, secure and healthy food system that works with nature, but also supports British farmers. Now, this government is offering a new deal to farmers to boost rural economic growth, strengthen Britain's food security, and we will be setting out more details in due course. Truth is, frankly, that climate change is one of the most significant threats to our food security. We've seen it this year in the extreme weather events that farmers are having to deal with. And I think it's absolutely the case that taking the difficult decisions now to address climate change will actually enhance rather than threaten our food security. And we do have to face up to the challenge of an energy transition to achieve that. And in doing that, we must also plan for how we use land in this country to ensure a proper balance between food security, restoring and preserving nature, and clean energy. Now, I was interested to hear some of the observations from members from the opposite benches after 14 years of opportunity to do some of the things they're now keen to do. But we will be picking up many of the points, and certainly one of the key ones is to publish a land use framework, because it was promised by the previous government. Frankly, there were many, many delays, and we are now picking that up. But that will work in tandem with our spatial energy plan. But I can assure the House that communities will quite rightly continue to have a say on proposals in their area. It's important for this government that where communities host clean energy infrastructure, they should directly benefit from it. But I have to say that we will not get into a position where the clean energy we need does not get built and the British people end up paying the price. Now, credible external estimates suggest that ground-mounted solar used just 0.1% of our land in 2022. And the biggest threat to nature and food security and to our rural communities isn't solar panels or onshore wind, it is that major climate challenge, that climate crisis, which in itself threatens our best farmland, food production, and indeed the livelihoods of farmers. And the government is absolutely going to proceed, not on the basis of hearsay and conjecture, but on evidence. Now, one of this government's 5 missions, which I'm sure people have heard much about, is our commitment to make Britain a clean energy superpower. And that's part of a wider ambition to deliver on existing net zero emissions targets. And frankly, farming has a big role to play in contributing to net zero. 70% or so of UK land is used for agriculture. Farmers are custodians of the natural environment, but absolutely work hard to manage their land responsibly whilst providing the food we all need. And I'm very glad that there's now a consensus around the need for farmers to be producing food. There was a curious period a few years ago when it seemed as if food production had somehow been forgotten. And I can see the Right Honourable Member nodding wisely because he knows to what I am referring, and I'm pleased that we've all moved on and can agree around this notion that food production is so important. Of course I will.
Previous government, albeit belatedly, changed planning guidance to give additional protection to grade 1, 2 and 3A land of the kind I described earlier. Furthermore, they said that when an energy developer expressed an interest in developing a site for solar panels, for example, any assessment of the soil should be an entirely independent one. Those seem to me to be perfectly reasonable policies, reasonable enough for a reasonable man to accept.
The Right Honourable Member tempts me into a level of detail which I'm afraid I'm not prepared to go into this evening. We are examining all these issues and will come to a considered position. We want to get the balance right, and that is what we will do, because the transition to more climate-friendly practices does not need to come at the expense of food production or farm profitability. In our view, net zero can absolutely support economic growth, including by accelerating the uptake of innovative technologies to increase productivity and efficiency in the agriculture sector. And that in turn will support net zero food production, efficient use of land and nature recovery. Now, our intention is to work closely, not just with the farming industry, but with all stakeholders who are involved in this on that necessary transition. And we will work with farmers to ensure that we avoid imposing unnecessary costs, and this I hope will be welcome to many in the sector. We absolutely guarantee to protect farmers from being undercut in trade deals. Now, the Right Honourable Member, as I rather anticipated, mentioned solar in particular. And I just want to say a little bit about that. As with all major infrastructure projects, there is a rigorous application process, and food production is rightly considered as part of that. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I would point you to the decision letters on these solar projects, which are available online on the Planning Inspectorate website. This is the normal procedure with planning decisions. There will be found all the documentation, not just the final decision letters. And I hope this makes it clear that all objections, relevant evidence and points raised throughout the planning inquiry are addressed and given weight in coming to a planning decision. Now, I appreciate the decision letter is a long, complex document, as indeed it should be, as it should be given the important issues raised. But there is a limit to what I can say, as I'm bound by the planning proprietary guidance, which is very clear that during the legal challenge period, planning ministers and officials aren't able to comment on the decision, summarise or interpret it. But more generally, I will very briefly, but I don't have much time.
Does he see any merit in legislating for a food security target?
To him, that is under consideration and will be coming back in due course. But I would note that where appropriate, solar projects can be designed to enable continued livestock grazing. There's also a science of agrivoltaics developing in which solar is integrated with arable farming in innovative ways. And solar energy can be an important way for farmers to increase their revenue from land less suited to higher value crop production. There is also evidence that solar can improve biodiversity. Now, we recognise that sadly confidence amongst farmers is at a record low, but this government wants to change that. We look forward to working closely with them to strengthen food security, progress the energy transition and boost rural economic growth. I'd like to conclude by thanking everyone who's contributed to an interesting and informed debate, and as ever, most importantly, the Right Honourable Member for South Holland and the Deepings, not just for securing the debate today. I'm sure it will continue, and I look forward to conducting it in the same constructive manner that we have started upon tonight.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The ayes have it. Order, order.
The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended.